will now go to question time, and I call Senator O'Sullivan.
Thank you very much, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government, Senator McCarthy. In the May budget, the government allocated $10.1 billion to pay the states more money to cover the costs of blowouts in state infrastructure projects. Australians are being forced to drive on unsafe and potholed roads, which have missed out on funding because of project cost blowouts. Has CFMEU corruption and lawless behaviour added to construction costs for road and rail projects?
Thank you, Senator O'Sullivan. Minister McCarthy.
Thank you, President, and I thank the senator for his question. The Albanese government is delivering infrastructure for all of Australia after cleaning up the mess left by the Liberals and Nationals. Last year we did the hard work of informing or reforming the Infrastructure Investment Program, ensuring that the 10-year $120 billion pipeline is sustainable and delivers well-planned, properly costed projects across the country. And in delivering this budget, we have
Minister, please resume your seat. Senator O'Sullivan.
Yes, on relevance, President. My question was whether or not the impact of the CFMEU was having on the costs of road and rail projects, whether corruption was occurring and that was impacting on road projects.
Thank you, Senator O'Sullivan. You did also mention projects generally, but I will draw the minister to order. Order. I will draw the minister to the second part of your question. Minister.
Thank you, President. Yes, well, I was going on to some of the budget questions there as well. But as I said yesterday to the question by Senator McKenzie, that Catherine King, the minister, has written to state and territory counterparts to convey the expectation that any information regarding improper or criminal conduct, Senator, by any entities related to projects delivered under the National Land Transport Act 2014 be reported immediately to the relevant regulator. The minister has embedded new assurances and protections in the Federation Funding Agreement that the Commonwealth has negotiated with the states, which was finalised on August 11.
Thank you, Minister. Senator O'Sullivan, first supplementary.
The Albanese government has cancelled, cut and delayed $27.9 billion worth of infrastructure projects over its first 2 years. Has CFMEU corruption and lawless behaviour resulted in delays to funding other road projects which are needed by Australian families and businesses?
Thank you, Senator O'Sullivan. Minister McCarthy. Please resume your seat, Minister. Senator McKenzie, I had just called the minister to answer the question. Minister, please continue.
Thank you, President. Look, we will not be lectured by the Liberals or Nationals, who spent a decade making oversized and undercooked infrastructure commitments across the country.
Exactly.
Your decade of failure and broken promises is why the Albanese government has taken significant and necessary reforms to Commonwealth infrastructure investment. When it comes to the CFMEU, as I said in my previous answer yesterday, we have taken decisive action. We've introduced legislation to clear the way for the CFMEU Construction Division to be placed under the control of an independent administrator with extensive powers to clean up the union. We've asked the Fair Work Ombudsman to undertake a targeted review of all enterprise agreements, and clearly that is not enough for you, Senator.
Senator O'Sullivan, second supplementary.
Well, it's not enough. That's true. You're not doing enough. There was an 11.7% increase in road deaths across Australia over the last year, in 2023-24, noting many unsafe roads have missed out on funding as a result of CFMEU-related infrastructure cost overruns and delays. To what extent have unsafe roads contributed to the worsening of the road toll?
Thank you, Senator O'Sullivan. Minister McCarthy.
Thank you, President. Well, I do think it's disingenuous of the senator to try and connect an area that we've always said that this is exactly, Senator Sterle, road safety issues across Australia but also we know that the biggest factor in high prices in the construction sector are supply chain issues like labour shortages and the cost of materials, which is largely, as we've said here in this Senate many times, been driven by the war in Ukraine.
Order.
You're not interested, are you? This is how much you care about what is actually going on.
Minister, resume your seat. Order. Order on my left. Order. Senator Cash. Order. Senator Ruston. Minister, had you finished or did you wish to continue? Okay, thank you. I'll go to Senator Sheldon.
My question is to the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations. Cost of living pressures are top of mind for all Australians, especially low-paid workers. I note that since taking office, the Albanese Labor government has advocated on behalf of low-paid workers in 3 consecutive Fair Work Commission annual wage reviews. How does the Albanese Labor government's agenda ease cost of living pressures and make sure Australians are earning more and keeping more of what they earn?
Thank you, Senator Sheldon. Minister Watt.
Thanks, President, and thank you, Senator Sheldon, for your question. You are absolutely right that the Albanese government has a strong track record on supporting low-paid Australians. Our government has gone into bat for workers not once, not twice, but 3 times, putting more money in families' pockets. And unlike Mr Dutton, Senator Cash and the Coalition, who think that paying workers fairly would mean a return to the dark ages, we see strong and sustainable wages growth as a part of the solution to the cost of living challenge, not a part of the problem. And I'm pleased to say that new data released today by the Australian Bureau of Statistics shows annual real wages continue to grow under the Albanese Labor government. The wage price index rose 0.8% in the June quarter to be 4.1% higher through the year. Annual real wages also grew 0.3% in the year to the June quarter 2024, meaning wages continue to grow above inflation. Under the Albanese government, annual real wages have been growing now for 3 consecutive quarters. And how does that compare to the Coalition government? Well, under the last government, annual real wages were going backwards by 3.4%. So under you lot, annual real wages were going backwards. Under the Albanese Labor government, they are going forwards. That is a vital part of dealing with cost of living challenges.
Order.
And if you had your way, people would be having their wages cut, as well as having their tax cuts taken off them, as well as having their energy bill relief taken off them, and every other cost of living pressure laid on top of them. It's only because of the action of the Albanese Labor government that we are getting wages moving again, and that is helping Australians deal with cost of living pressures. This return to sustainable wages growth under a Labor government is welcome, but we know that people are still under pressure. And that's why we're focused on tackling inflation and delivering responsible cost of living relief, including our tax cuts to every taxpayer, which have been rolling out since July 1.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Sheldon, first supplementary. Order.
At the 2022 election, the Albanese Labor government promised to get wages moving, and since then the government has introduced and implemented reforms to protect and grow the wages of Australian workers. How are the Albanese government's reforms helping Australians earn more and keep more of what they earn while relieving cost of living pressures, and why are these reforms so important?
Thank you, Senator Sheldon. Minister Watt.
Thanks, Senator Sheldon. Well, we all know that workers need successful businesses to stay employed, and likewise businesses would cease to function without workers. And to retain quality staff, you know what businesses need? They need to ensure their staff are paid appropriately. And because of the reforms the Albanese government has delivered, what we're now seeing is full-time minimum wage workers earning an extra $143 per week. Again, if you'd had your way, those minimum wage workers would have been getting nothing more to deal with the cost of living pressures that they're facing. But under the Labor government, they're getting an extra $143 per week. And as we announced last week, we are backing in a 15% pay rise for early educators that you still don't support. And that means a typical early childhood education and care educator will receive a pay rise of at least $103 per week, increasing to at least $155 per week from next December. Increasing wages is not only a win for workers, it's also a win for productivity and a win for the economy.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Sheldon, second supplementary.
In the face of cost of living pressures, I note that the Liberals and Nationals have not once advocated for low-paid workers at the Fair Work Commission and voted against the Albanese Labor government's reforms to get wages moving. What are the main barriers to getting wages moving again?
Minister Watt.
Oh, hello. There they are, right over there. All of them. Look at them all. Well, the main barrier to continuing getting wages moving and dealing with cost of living pressures is the scary possibility of a Peter Dutton Prime Ministership with Senator Cash in the driver's seat on wages policy. Now, I know this side of the chamber can't bear to think about it, but we also know there's a fair few over there who don't really want to think about that either. Australians simply cannot risk Mr Dutton and the Coalition dipping their hands in your pocket and cutting your wages. They've already committed to targeted repeals of the legislation we introduced that is contributing to wages growth. They've also committed to cutting pay and conditions for casual workers. They want you to work after hours without getting paid by abolishing the right to disconnect, and today we learned they are developing a specific election policy to strip away workers' rights in the Western Australian mining industry. The Coalition clearly want Australians to work longer for less. Under Labor, you'll earn more and keep more of what you earn.
Order. Order. I draw to the attention of honourable senators the presence in the gallery of the Australian Political Exchange Council's 19th delegation from Japan, led by Mr Fuji Hisayuki. On behalf of all senators, I wish you a warm welcome to Australia and, in particular, to the Senate. Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Treasurer, Senator Gallagher. Minister, yesterday you claimed the Albanese government had slashed spending growth. What was the rate of projected spending growth prior to the 2022 election, and what is the projected rate now after 3 Labor budgets?
Thank you, Senator Colbeck. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you very much. I thank Senator Colbeck for the question. And whilst those opposite raise concerns about the level of inflation and spending that is occurring now in the economy, I would like to just remind them that when the March budget that was held before the election in 2022, the Coalition spent $40 billion when inflation was about to reach a peak of 6.1%. So whilst we've seen inflation moderate and we've found savings and we've got the budget in better shape and we've reduced debt so that we've saved the Australian taxpayers $80 billion in interest payments and we've turned significant Liberal deficits into Labor surpluses, when we have supported additional spending, it's been very modest as inflation moderates. In fact, in this last budget, I think the net spend was in the order of just over $11 billion, when inflation is half of what we inherited. So we've been finding savings, paying down debt, turning deficits into surpluses, finding savings and reprioritising across the budget.
Resume your seat. Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, President. On direct relevance, the question was what was the projected spending rate growth prior to the 2022 election and what is the projected spending rate now after 3 Labor budgets? We've had...
Thank you, Senator Colbeck. There's no need for debate. I will remind the senator of that part of your question. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you. Well, I was putting the context around it, President, which is that those opposites seem very concerned about spending now. They didn't have the same concern when inflation was much higher and they were trying to win an election where they tried to shovel out $40 billion worth of additional spending at a time when they knew inflation was a massive problem. That is what happened. And when I look at the statistics of the spending, if we look at the percentage of GDP, it is much lower. I think in the 22-23 you were spending at 27.2%. In Labor's 24-25 budget,
thank you,
it was
24.5%. Has expired. Senator Colbeck's first supplementary.
Thank you, President. Is the projected level of spending in the 24-25 financial year now higher or lower than was forecast in Labor's first budget?
Thank you, Senator Colbeck. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you. And the Shadow Finance Minister interjects. So I just give the real spending growth. The average under the Liberal government was 4.1%. Under our government, over 6 years to 2027-28, it's 1.4%. And what that shows, so the numbers don't support the argument that you are putting. The numbers do not support the argument. You talk out of both sides of your mouth all the time. You want to spend more, spend less. You want to argue that wages spirals will cause inflation, and then you complain that wages aren't growing fast enough. People see the inconsistency in your argument. We have showed restraint. We have repaired the budget, and at the same time, we've found room to support people with cost of living help, whether it be tax cuts, whether it be energy bill rebates, whether it be support for early education and care, both for parents and for the workers, whether it be reforming aged care. So yes, we are tackling those important investment areas at the same time.
The time for answering has expired. Senator Colbeck, second supplementary.
Thank you, President. On what basis do you claim to have slashed spending growth when your government's own budget shows spending has increased by $64 billion in 24-25?
Thank you, Senator Colbeck. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you. Well, there's the numbers that I just read out, Senator Colbeck, so the difference between 4.1 and 1.7, for example. But there's also the fact that we have found $77 billion in savings. And you have not, in your last budget, exactly, I'll tell you how many savings you found. 0. We didn't have to look very hard because there were none. There were no savings. You went on a spending spree at a time when inflation was at its highest. That is what was occurring. We came into government, we found savings, we returned money to budget, we've lowered the debt, we've turned deficits into surpluses, and we've done all of that at the same time that we've shown restraint in spending, and we've been able to meet some of the urgent pressures there were across government services and indeed to help people with some of the cost of living issues that we've been seeing over the last year or so.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Hodgkins-May.
My question is to the Minister representing Early Childhood Education, Minister Watt. Educators and unions have fought long and hard for a 25% pay rise for early childhood educators, and last week the government announced an overdue 15% wage increase. These educators, who are overwhelmingly women, have been calling for a 25% wage increase that values the essential and under-recognised work of educating and caring for our kids in those critical early years. For too long, these childcare workers have been leaving the industry in droves because they aren't being paid enough and they can't afford to stay. Our childcare system is in a crisis. Australia needs a workforce strategy that continues to build capacity and that requires paying our educators what they deserve. Minister, don't you think that early childhood educators deserve a 25% pay increase?
Thank you, Senator Hodgkins-May. Minister Watt.
Thank you, President. And thank you, Senator, for your question. Well, only the Greens could be upset about a pay rise being provided by a Labor government to some of the lowest paid and most important workers in our community. Only the Greens could be disappointed about that. And you know the reason they're disappointed about that is they can't use their favourite phrase, "we did it," because they didn't do it. It was a Labor government that delivered a much-needed, a much-deserved pay rise for early childhood educators in our country, obviously in partnership with the trade union movement, who, along with members of those unions and those workers, have campaigned for this for a very long time. And among our ranks, we have a number of people who've been campaigning for this a whole lot longer than the Greens, who like to jump on the bandwagon. I'm talking about people like Senator Bilyk, who actually is a former early childhood educator and has been campaigning for this for 40 years. I'm talking about people like Senator Walsh, whose professional career was devoted to assisting these workers get a pay rise that they deserve, and the list goes on across our ranks. So don't come in here and try and be Johnny-come-latelys and all of a sudden say that you care about early childhood educators when you've done nothing about it until the last meme was available. Don't lecture us about supporting workers. Don't support us. Yeah, no, I'm going to point at you because you're the people who want to jump on the bandwagon when Labor governments actually do something.
Minister Watt, resume your seat. Minister Watt, Senator Shoebridge. Senator Shoebridge.
I think, President, you can anticipate my point of order.
Thank you. Minister Watt, I Senator Wong. Senator Wong, order. Senator Wong, order across the chamber. Order. I am responding to the point of order raised by Senator Shoebridge, and I do remind you, Minister Watt, to direct your answers to the chair. Please.
And Chair, I suspect you might agree in your impartial manner that the Labor government has been doing a lot, because it's something that you, I know, have campaigned on for a very long time as well, along with early childhood
Minister Watt,
workers.
please resume your seat. Senator Shoebridge.
The minister should not bring you into a partisan debate
Senator
in the way he
Shoebridge,
did.
please
It
resume
impugns
your seat. Senator Shoebridge, resume your seat. Resume your seat. Please continue, Minister.
So now the Greens, wanting to complain about something the Labor government has done, now dictate who can actually support that policy in the Labor government. There you go. That's the Greens for you. Now, every person and every group involved in the early childhood education sector has welcomed this pay rise as much needed. It would appear that the only group who's unhappy about this is the Greens, because they now lose a campaign opportunity calling for a pay rise because we've actually
Minister.
done
The time for answering has expired. Senator Hodgkins-May, first supplementary.
Women and families across Australia are hurting because early childhood education and care is too expensive and too hard to access. Kids are missing out on crucial early years education, and parents are missing out on much-needed paid work in a cost-of-living crisis. Last week, the government could have made early education and care free and accessible, but instead they locked in a fee hike for families who are already struggling. Minister, why won't your government make early childhood education and care free and universal, just like primary and secondary school?
Thank you, Senator Hodgkins-May. Minister Watt.
Thank you, President. Well, it must be hard being a Greens senator, because every time there's good news delivered by a Labor government, you've got to find a reason to whinge about it. And you've got to be reminded that if you're a Greens senator, all you actually can achieve is a whole lot of complaining rather than actually delivering the kind of things that the Labor government is delivering. Let me tell you what Lisa, an early childhood educator in New South Wales, had to say about the pay rise the Albanese government has just delivered. What Lisa said, and I'm sure she speaks for many in her position, she says, "This is a monumental moment. It is history-making. This means I can stay in the job I love, and I know that it is going to change a lot of lives, not just my own. We are proud to finally win the recognition that educators deserve." So you can pontificate all you want, you can complain all you want, but you will never represent the kind of people like Lisa who actually work in this sector and deserve the pay rise that they are now getting as a direct result of an Albanese Labor government.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Hodgkins-May, second supplementary.
Research shows that the childcare subsidy activity test is contributing to 126,000 children from low-income households missing out on early years education. The activity test is cruel and punitive. It unfairly punishes low-income families and keeps women out of work. No one wants the activity test, and parents in the sector continue to call for its abolition. Minister, why is your government locking 126,000 kids out of early years education by not abolishing the activity test?
Minister Watt.
Well, again, thank you very much for that question, Senator, because it now gives me an opportunity to not just talk about the pay rise we've provided to early childhood educators, but about the cut in childcare fees that the Albanese Labor government is providing families all around Australia. As a result of the policies that the Albanese Labor government has brought in, we now see childcare fees reduced by 11% on average for Australian families. That is a direct result of our policies.
Watt, please resume your seat. Senator Hodgkins-May.
Point of order, Speaker. I specifically asked about the abolishing of the activity test, and I would refer the acting minister to my question.
Minister Wong.
Thank you. Well, 2 points. First, the minister's only had 22 seconds. I'm sure he will get to that point. The second point is, I'm sure he will. I have great faith in Senator Watt. The second is, Senator, you actually made an assertion about the cost of childcare, so the minister is entitled to respond to that assertion.
Thank you, Minister Wong. Order. Order. First of all, Senator Hodgkins-May, I'm the President, not the Speaker. And secondly, you did refer to fee hikes in your at the start of your question, and you talked about women not being able to go to work. So the minister is entitled to canvass those issues in his response. Please continue, Minister Watt.
Thank you, President. So the issues that Senator Hodgins-May is talking about have been the subject of a number of reviews that have been presented to the government, and they are, of course, matters that we are considering. But in the meantime, what we're actually doing is making childcare cheaper for Australian families, another thing that the coalition opposed. Let's not forget about them. That is actually making childcare cheaper for Australian families, with the ACCC finding that out-of-pocket expenses for centre-based daycare decreased by 11% on average between June and September 2023. So again, it takes a rare talent to complain about childcare fees being reduced. It takes a rare talent to complain about early childhood pay.
Thank you,
but
Minister.
you are
The
up
time
to the job.
for answering has expired. Senator Grogan.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister for Finance. The Albanese Labor government is working hard every day to deliver cost-of-living relief for Australian families in a responsible way. Central to this is ensuring that Australians earn more and keep more of what they earn. Can the minister please inform the Senate about what measures the Albanese Labor government have put in place to support Australian families to meet costs? And can the minister also please inform the Senate about how these measures have been carefully calibrated to ensure they put downward pressure on the cost of energy, housing and groceries?
Thank you, Senator Grogan. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. I thank Senator Grogan for her question and for the work she does in advocating for the good people of South Australia and raising all of these issues with us. Our number one priority is delivering cost of living relief. You've seen that in the core of all of the decisions that we've taken since coming to government. So every Australian taxpayer is getting a tax cut, not just some. Every Australian household is getting $300 energy bill relief. 2.6 million low-paid workers who were forgotten by those opposite are getting their third consecutive pay rise. Stronger Medicare and cheaper medicines in every community. HECS relief for everyone with a student debt. More homes built more quickly in every part of the country, and cheaper groceries by strengthening the Food and Grocery Code. This is sensible cost of living relief that we can provide without adding to inflation. There's more to do, and we will keep working every day, as we have since we've been elected. We know it is a privilege to be in these positions, so that we are able to make decisions that benefit all Australians. And we know that those opposite, if they got their hands on government again, it would mean higher power prices because they don't support energy bill relief. It would be higher housing prices because they haven't supported pretty much any part of our Homes for Australia plan. Higher taxes, particularly for those that weren't going to get a tax cut under their original plan, and lower wages. And we know that because we know their form in government. Low wages were a design feature of their economic architecture. They did not go into Fair Work Commission's annual wage review with any submission that supported a wage increase for low-paid workers. That's what we would have if this mob opposite got back into government. And that's why we will continue to work against that every single day.
Senator Grogan, first supplementary.
Thank you, President. That was a great answer from the minister. I really appreciate the detail. The Wage Price Index was released today, showing that wages are rising up 0.8% to 4.1% higher through the year. The government has also put downward pressure on inflation after inheriting an inflation rate of 6.1% from the coalition. Can the minister please explain how the government is working in complement with the RBA on the inflation challenge while supporting cost of living measures?
Thank you, Senator Grogan. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. Thanks, Senator Grogan, for that question, the supplementary. We always, and I think you've heard it from Senator Watt, Minister Watt this afternoon, we want Australians to earn more and keep more of what they earn. And we welcome the wages data that was released today. Those opposite don't get it. They don't get it. Higher wages is the best form of cost of living relief Australians can get, and that is why we have been pushing for wages growth in this country after a decade of wage stagnation. The opposition are oblivious to the cost of living challenges facing many Australians. They've voted against our cost of living relief at every opportunity, and now they're saying they want to cut pensions and services that Australians rely on. As the RBA Governor said, the government's job is to get inflation and provide services for Australians. We are doing both because Australians would suffer if we didn't do both, and we will continue our approach, President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Grogan, second supplementary.
Thank you.
Beg your pardon, first supplementary.
Second.
Sorry.
Minister, as we know on this side, not everyone in this parliament has supported the Albanese Labor government's cost of living relief measures. Our government inherited an inflation rate of 6.1% from those opposite at the last election, and we have worked hard to bring that number down while supporting Australian families. Can the minister please explain why a slash-and-burn budget approach would have left Australian families worse off if it was those opposite?
Thank you, Senator Grogan. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, and I thank Senator Grogan for the supplementary, because those opposite are very quick to use a figure of $315 billion in their media interviews, where they say it's excessive spending. But they are less likely to give you a breakdown of what that spending is, because they would then have to say that they are going to cut the age pension and other income support payments, that they would cut rent assistance and spending on housing, they would cut the money for women's safety, they would cut the energy bill relief, they would cut the pay of aged and early education and care workers, they would cut funding for medicines on the PBS and for our measures for cheaper childcare. They wouldn't support expanding and paying superannuation on PPL, on natural disaster recovery funding and relief, on increased spending on veterans' compensation and rehabilitation claims. And I could go on. I'm not going to have enough time. But that is the secret behind the number that you use.
Thank you, Minister. Senator David Pocock.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Health, Minister Gallagher. It's been reported in the Financial Review today that talks are starting on health insurance premium increases. Recently, I had a Canberran tell me that even with private health insurance, he was charged $20,000 out of pocket for prostate cancer treatment. I've had another tell me that they were stung $3,000 for life-saving radiotherapy. A knee replacement in the ACT is around $3,000 more expensive than the Australian median. Minister, why should Canberrans, why should any Australian, cop an increase in their insurance premiums when the private system is failing to deliver value and cover the cost of routine procedures?
Thank you, Senator Pocock. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. I thank Senator Pocock for the question. Let me be clear, I think people in the ACT do pay too much for access to private health care treatment. That's been a long-standing problem here in the ACT. It's one that I tried to focus on when I was in the Assembly and continue to focus on, and it essentially comes down to a lack of competition in the private medical market here. We're a small market. We don't have the number of professionals, health professionals operating privately that some of the other jurisdictions have. But it is a real problem, and it does deserve a lot more scrutiny than it's getting, because Canberrans pay a lot more than their fellow Australians around other jurisdictions, including small jurisdictions, to pay for private health cover. And in fact, we have the highest private health insurance coverage in the country and the lowest utilisation of it. And some of that has to be linked to the prices that people pay for out-of-pocket expenses. The focus that we've been having in health is to repair the damage that was done under Peter Dutton's work when he was the health minister, to make sure that we're investing in Medicare, that we're improving bulk billing, that we're providing cheaper medicines, that we are ensuring Medicare urgent care clinics and other parts of Medicare are actually working, which bulk billing, for example, was in a freefall when we inherited it. We're starting to turn that around. There is more to do here. But I agree with Senator Pocock, the out-of-pocket costs, which is related to but not completely at the hand of the private health insurers, requires a lot more scrutiny, including what people are paying here in the ACT, and I would encourage them to shop around when they are getting their referrals to see if they can get lower prices from other medical professionals.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Pocock, first supplementary.
Thank you, President. Thank you, Minister. I'm glad you agree. I'm concerned that none of the measures you mentioned relate to the cost of surgery, and I'm interested what actions the government will take to protect Australians from outrageous gap fees and ensure that they actually receive some value from their private health insurance, given we have a system that forces people into having private health insurance?
Thank you, Senator Pocock. Minister Gallagher.
Well, thank you. In terms of surgery, we have a very good public health system, but in some areas it does mean that there is waits for people, and I think for medical treatment or private medical treatment, that is why some people go private, because they can get their surgery done faster than waiting on the public list. But I would say in this country we do have an excellent public health system that provides services to anyone regardless of their background or need. That is important to understand. I think the other thing is the work that we're trying to do for medical professionals, those private specialists, to publish their fees so that people can see at the earliest opportunity what some of the rates are going. Now, the doctors haven't been as fast as we would have liked to upload some of that information, and I think we need to continue to put more pressure on there. And in terms of the private health insurance, and any increase there, we need to make sure that any increases are reasonable in line with escalating costs.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Pocock, second supplementary.
Thank you, President. Thank you, Minister. We know that the public system is clogged. There are over 500,000 people in the public system on the surgery waiting list, 3,000 in the ACT. Only half of people needing semi-urgent surgery are seen on time in the ACT. Is there any plan from the government to rein in increases to insurance premiums when people aren't seeing value from their private health insurance?
Thank you, Senator Pocock. Minister Gallagher.
Well, I think that's certainly the work the government does on an annual basis. I mean, that scrutinises, and I can't recall off the top of my head the last increase, but it was a modest increase to private health insurance. So these are something the minister looks at carefully and takes a range of advice on. But you know, the price that some private specialist pays over and above, you know, even the responsibility of the private health insurer. I mean, for those out-of-pocket costs on top of or you know, above the scheduled fee for those procedures, then that is a decision of doctors providing that service. And I know, having been through it recently here in the ACT, you know, the charges for my family member were you know, 100 times what the scheduled fee was. So there is a problem, and it needs further scrutiny about what can be done, particularly here in the ACT, when people are often charged double what the costs are in a place like Sydney or Melbourne, or indeed in Adelaide.
The time for answering has expired. Senator Van.
Thank you, President. My question is to Senator McAllister, the Minister representing the Minister for Climate Change and Energy, and I congratulate her on her promotion. Given the proven potential of electric vehicles to provide energy and system security services to the electricity grid using vehicle-to-grid or V2G technology, which was recently demonstrated by the Realising Electric Vehicle-to-Grid Services project run at ANU, is the government taking steps to update and harmonise national grid codes and standards to facilitate the broader adoption of V2G technology?
Thank you, Senator Van. Minister McAllister.
Thank you very much, Senator Van, for that question. And you're right that this is a technology that potentially has great potential, supporting consumers in meeting the energy needs in their own households, but also, if done well, supporting our broader requirement to have a grid that is reliable and can respond flexibly to changes in demand across that grid. Minister Bowen sometimes refers to electric vehicles, in fact, as batteries on wheels. And it's on that basis that the government is taking the steps that we are taking generally in relation to electric vehicles and specifically in relation to the national standards that are required to make sure that this technology is integrated and integrated well. You'll know that we had an extended public discussion about standards for new vehicles and encouraging a greater number of models and a greater choice for consumers in relation to vehicles. And that applied, of course, to more efficient petrol vehicles, but also to the importation of a wider range of electric vehicles, including vehicles that are at a price point that will be attractive to the broadest range of consumers. But you speak specifically of the issues in relation to the grid, and it is a matter that the energy ministers have paid a great deal of attention to. So energy ministers, in fact, at their last meeting, initiated a process, adopted a roadmap which sets out a series of pieces of work that the energy ministers agreed to undertake together to establish the relevant standards for electric vehicles. Minister Bowen has been clear that he would like to see some progress on some of those matters over the course of this year, but we understand that this is a technology where we have time to prepare.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Van, first supplementary.
Thank you, Minister. Given AEMO has not even included the capability in their ISP to any great extent, and there is billions of dollars being prioritised for strengthening the grid and gold-plating it, some would say. Given the growth of EVs and the evolving landscape of energy technology, is the government considering revising its market projections and energy policies to better reflect the potential contributions that EVs with V2G technology could make?
Thank you, Senator Van. Minister McAllister.
Thanks very much, Senator Van. And you're right to make the point that the technology potentially could have a real impact on the projections for both demand and supply in the national electricity market. We are at a point in time where the technologies that are available to us are actually evolving and changing, and it's for that reason that AEMO not only regularly updates their projections and upgrades the Integrated Systems Plan, but makes sure that when it does that, it engages very closely with a range of stakeholders to make sure that the assumptions that they're using and that the inputs that they're obtaining reflect broadly the understanding in the market about the technologies that are on foot and are coming towards us. Right now, we don't have a particularly large number of vehicles with this capacity ready to go in this market, but that could change, and I'm quite certain AEMO will be watching this as they update, as they regularly do their projections.
The time has expired. Senator Van, second supplementary.
Thank you, President. Minister, is the government planning to allocate additional funding or introduce incentives to support research, development and deployment of V2G technology?
Thank you, Senator Van. Minister McAllister.
Thanks very much, President, and thanks, Senator Van. Senator Van, as you know, the chief vehicle for providing support for emerging technologies and technology trials is ARENA. And in our last budget, the government substantially replenished ARENA's funds to provide support for a range of technologies, including potentially the technologies that you speak of. We are conscious that this is a world in which Australia is just one participant in a global market where, vehicle manufacturers around the world are thinking about how best to integrate this capacity into the vehicles that they sell. I am quite certain that the reforms we've undertaken to change the shape of the Australian market will see Australians with a much greater opportunity to access some of these vehicles as they come into commercial production globally.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Lambie.
Thank you, Madam President. My question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Mr Wong. A key contributor to cost of living is the cost of power because electricity price is set by the gas price. Despite all your measures on gas, the price of gas on the East Coast last quarter was $13.76 per gigajoule. Meanwhile, in Western Australia, a state that has a gas reservation policy, it was $8.66 per gigajoule. We have an abundance of gas, and yet most Australians are paying through-the-roof prices for it and electricity. Why is your government putting the interests of the big gas cartels ahead of Australians and not considering a gas reservation policy?
Thank you, Senator Lambie. Minister Wong.
Thank you, President. Thank you to Senator Lambie for that question. And she's right to draw attention to the rising costs that Australians have been facing for energy, and it's one of the reasons why the government has, both in relation to electricity and gas, put in place measures to try and deal with this. We are committed to doing what we have to do to ensure Australians and Australian households and businesses have access to reliable and affordable energy both today and into the future. In relation to prices, I would make the point, Senator, when we came to office, average East Coast gas prices were over $30 a gigajoule. Yesterday, the average price I'm advised was somewhere around $12.30. So I'm making the point that this is a long-standing problem. In relation to WA, obviously, for historical and geographic reasons, WA has a separate gas market to the East Coast and a separate set of gas policies. The East Coast market has experienced larger price fluctuations for many reasons, including reasons not connected to gas reservation policy. When we came into government, we took immediate strong action on both gas supply and price. We introduced the mandatory code of conduct. We reformed the powers of AEMO to take action to address supply issues before they eventuated. Because of that, the market operator now has the power to manage the East Coast gas market through, including with powers to direct gas supplies around the system and between states. And the gas code, which those opposite didn't support, has now secured more than 600 petajoules of domestic gas for East Coast users out to 2033. That's enough to run East Coast gas-fired power stations for about 6 years. So you're right, Senator. Prices for energy, whether electricity or gas, are higher than we would like. We know that Australians are battling the cost of living, and we are.
Senator Lambie, first supplementary.
Thank you. A recent AAT FOI decision refusing access to a domestic gas reservation options paper based on advice from DFAT shows that our own government is putting the interests of other countries before Australia, and I quote, "Potential damage arising from disclosure of information relating to gas reservation in Australia because of the very real economic impact that Australians' domestic policies could have on those countries," end quote. Minister, why is your government putting the interest of foreign countries ahead of this one?
Thank you, Senator Lambie. Minister Wong.
We always look to Australia's interests, Senator Lambie, and I'd make a couple of points about that, and just listening to the quote in that. Firstly, obviously in relation to an options paper, that is not government policy, but what options might or might not have been considered. The second point I'd make is around investment in our energy sector by companies, which might be foreign companies, but investment in Australia, enabling Australian jobs. And if you look at our resources sector, if you look at our energy sector, if you look at what has happened in coal and in the LNG industry, all of those Australian jobs, many of them have been enabled because of investment by energy partners. So I would make the point to you that it's not correct to say that looking at what other countries, how they might react is somehow not in the interest of Australia. We have an interest at ensuring investment continues.
Senator Lambie, second supplementary.
Thank you. Australians are struggling to pay the power and gas, yet you complained to Senator Birmingham in this chamber last November that he temporarily said no to Santos, no to Woodside, no to the Japanese company Inpex, no to Korea and no to Japan. I don't have a problem with saying no to them because I work for the Australian question. My question is the Albanese government working for them?
Thank you, Senator Lambie. Minister Wong.
We always work for Australians. That's why that's our job. And I again refer back to what I said earlier. If you want to look at the number of the companies that you talked about, they invest in Australia. They invest in very large projects in Australia. They employ very large numbers of Australians. That the development of many of our energy industries has been as a joint endeavour between Australia and countries who seek these energy resources. I'd also make the point that these are the countries who will also co-invest with us, work with us on things like green hydrogen. So those energy partnerships matter to Australia. They matter to our transition to a lower carbon economy, and they matter to Australian jobs, because it is Australian jobs which are benefited by this sort of investment.
Thank you, Minister. Senator O'Neill.
Very much, Madam President. My question is to the Minister for Emergency Management, Minister McAllister, and I want to take the opportunity to congratulate her on her new role, and I know she'll bring all the vim and vigour of a great New South Welsh woman to the role. What reforms has the Albanese government undertaken during this term of government to make sure Australia is better prepared for natural disasters?
Thank you, Senator O'Neill. Minister McAllister.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Senator O'Neill. And I recognise your long-standing interest in these issues and in the wellbeing of communities in New South Wales. This is, of course, my first question as Minister in this portfolio, and I want to acknowledge my predecessor, Senator Watt. His is a legacy that I am proud to build on. I also want to acknowledge the communities who are still on the long road to recovery following floods and fires, and the terrific workers and volunteers, some of whom I've already had the privilege of meeting in the last 2 weeks. But as the frequency and severity of natural disasters has grown, so has the expectation that the Australian government will be able to step up and support communities when they are at their lowest. And the Albanese government has risen to this challenge. Over the last 2 years, we have implemented a number of reforms to ensure that Australians can be better prepared for natural disasters, so these communities can respond better and recover faster when a disaster hits us. And these include creating the National Emergency Management Agency to lead a more unified and more coordinated approach to emergency management, completing a substantial upgrade to the National National Situation Room, establishing and building a National Emergency Management Stockpile, and investing in Disaster Relief Australia to boost volunteers providing recovery and support to clean up after disasters. Our government is focused on working collaboratively with our partners to help communities prepare for and manage disasters. And states and territories, of course, retain primary responsibility for these responses. But our government's approach is to show leadership, to boost our capacity to coordinate, and show that we are ready to support states and territories and support communities at the worst possible moments.
Thank you, Minister. Senator O'Neill, first supplementary.
Thank you very much, Minister. And I know from being at the Gundagai show and people talking about the challenge and response in New South Wales, they will very much appreciate the answer that you've given there. As we enter this second half of the year, my community in New South Wales is starting to turn its mind to the coming high-risk weather season. What work is the Albanese government undertaking in the coming months to ensure Australians are ready for this high-risk weather season?
Thank you, Senator O'Neill. Minister McAllister.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Senator O'Neill. We do know how important it is to work with states and territories, work with industry and work with communities on emergency management. And the work that's already underway includes plans for the Albanese government's second high-risk weather season preparedness summit, which will bring together government, industry and community sector to prepare for the coming season. We're also establishing briefings between the Bureau of Meteorology, state and territory agencies and local governments on how to implement and use the Australian warning system so that communities can rely on consistent information and use consistent language when they are receiving that information, and a series of national exercises are stress testing our arrangements with state and territory governments and with industries. In this year's budget, we have also committed an additional $35 million over 2 years to boost Australia's aerial capability.
Thank you, Minister. Senator O'Neill, second supplementary.
Thank you very much, Minister. And I'm pleased and relieved, in fact, to hear that this government's committed to ensuring that Australians are, in fact, better prepared for natural disasters so they can respond and recover faster. Looking beyond this next season, however, how is the Albanese government working with states, territories and local governments to build resilience to future natural disasters?
Thank you, Senator O'Neill. Minister McAllister.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Senator O'Neill. So when we came into government, we promised to turn the previous government's defunct Emergency Response Fund into a dedicated fund for resilience and mitigation projects, and we have delivered. The Albanese government's flagship Disaster Ready Fund is investing up to $200 million in Commonwealth funding every year for projects across the country. And last year we announced nearly $400 million in matched funding for 187 projects. These included flood levees, evacuation shelters, fuel hazard mapping capability, seawalls and more. Now, this is in stark contrast to the former government. In 3 years, their $4.8 billion emergency response fund did not complete a single mitigation project or release a cent in recovery funding, while it made the government over $800 million in interest. Australians expect their government to support them in times of need, and they can be assured we will do just that.
Senator Fawcett.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Home Affairs, Senator Watt. Minister, reporting by Reuters and others of polling showing that 3 in 4 residents of Gaza and the West Bank support the terrorist group Hamas and indeed their actions on the 7th of October has led to questions about the security implications of visas being issued to this cohort during the current crisis. In an interview with the ABC on Sunday, the Director-General of ASIO, Mike Burgess, said, and I quote, "Part of that visa process is when criteria are hit, they are referred to my organisation and ASIO does its thing." End quote. Will the minister commit to referring every visa application from this cohort to ASIO so that it can conduct the appropriate security checks?
Thank you, Senator Fawcett. Minister Watt.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Senator Fawcett. Well, I'm sure that Senator Fawcett would agree that Australia has a proud record of working with our international allies to help people escape from crisis, such as what we're seeing in Gaza right now. The war between Israel and Hamas has displaced millions of Palestinians, and Australia has once again done our part. But we have not allowed this to compromise our national security. Our security and intelligence agencies have taken exactly the same approach here as they took with Ukrainians who have arrived since the Russian invasion in 2022 and Afghans who fled from the Taliban under the former government. I'm a little surprised to hear someone like Senator Fawcett, who I know has a great deal of respect for our armed forces and our security agencies. I'm a little surprised to hear Senator Fawcett question the judgment of well, Senator Fawcett asked the question.
Order.
Senator Fawcett asked the question.
Order.
Senator Fawcett's a big boy. He's okay. He's okay. He's okay. I am a little surprised to hear Senator Fawcett, who, as I say, I know has respect for our armed forces, as a former armed forces member himself, question the judgment of the Director-General of ASIO, Mr Mike Burgess.
Minister, please resume your seat. Senator Fawcett.
Thank you, President. Relevance. The question was about the government's commitment to refer every application, not about the judgment of the Director-General, who, as the Minister correctly indicates, I have the highest regard for.
Thank you, Senator Colbeck. The Minister is being relevant and I will continue to listen carefully. Minister Watt.
Thanks, President. Well, Senator Fawcett, as I've already implied and will now make explicit, we are following exactly the same process as occurred under the former government. Applicants for visas, as is the case here, are checked for security risks. We are following exactly the same process, and Mike Burgess, someone I have confidence in and our government has confidence in as the Director-General of ASIO, has said that this is the same process as was followed under the former government and is the appropriate process. So I think the question for the opposition is whether they have faith in ASIO or not.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Colbeck, first supplementary.
Thank you, President. So, Minister, the issue for you is that in the same interview the Director-General said, and I quote, "When things get referred to ASIO, we deal with them effectively. Of course, there might be times when they don't get or didn't get referred to us in time." End quote. Is this why multiple individuals leaving Gaza had their Australian visas cancelled after they'd been granted?
Thank you, Senator Fawcett. Minister Watt.
I would have thought it's a good thing for ASIO to provide advice that certain individuals' visas should be cancelled or not granted, rather than not making that decision. That's an example of ASIO doing its job and the government listening to the advice of ASIO. Would the opposition seriously prefer us to ignore the advice of ASIO? What we've done in some instances is cancel visas when security checks have revealed that those individuals should not be granted a visa. And again, this is exactly the same process as was employed by the former government.
Please resume your seat. Order. Senator McKenzie, I called order 3 times. It applies to you. I will ask you to either remain silent in the chamber or leave the chamber. Minister Watt, please continue.
Thanks, President. So, as I say, the process that this government is adopting and ASIO is adopting is exactly the same process as ASIO adopted under the former government. We listen with respect to the advice of our security agencies, including Mr Burgess as the Director-General of ASIO, where he and his colleagues provide advice that a visa should not be issued or should be cancelled. We accept that advice.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Fawcett, second supplementary.
Thank you, President. Media reports suggest that the Albanese government is developing a visa pathway to allow temporary visa holders from Palestine to remain in Australia. Minister, will you make a commitment to the Australian people that not a single Hamas supporter will be brought into Australia under this scheme?
Thank you, Senator Fawcett. Minister Watt.
Thank you, President. Thank you, Senator Fawcett. I saw the comments of Mr Burgess on this matter on Insider's program, and I'm sure you can go and have a look at them yourselves, where he explained the approach of our National Security Agency to people who have expressed views about Hamas. Again, we respect the advice of our security agencies and people like Mr Burgess, and we act on that advice. So I'm confident that ministers will act in accordance with that advice when those decisions are required. What I also saw Mr Burke say, as the incoming Home Affairs Minister, he made the very obvious point that Gaza is a war zone. People were provided with tourist visas initially in order to get them out of a conflict zone quickly after security checks had been undertaken. But it is unrealistic to think that it is proper or safe to return people to a conflict zone like Gaza, which is why further consideration is being given to their status going forward.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, President. I ask that further questions be placed on notice.